Indeed, Telcom moving with you. Listen, so my guest tonight, 3 lawyers, 3 seasoned advocates. They know their way around the courtroom. We're going to talk about the latest news. NASA about turn, now going to the Supreme Court. Dr. P.L.O. Lumumba, Kamodo Waiganjo, Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi, all present. Dr. P.L.O., let me start with you. This is about turn by NASA. Last weekend, after the results were announced, NASA was vehement about the court not being an option. About turn today.
You know, perhaps we ought to be very clear. Is it an about turn? Is it a climb down? Or is it a revelation? It is a revelation. I was very worried when I heard my good friend Jim Orengo, who is a senior advocate, going into the Agora and saying, we will not go to court. In every civilized nation, when you have a dispute, the place to go is to the courts. And I'm very happy with NASA and by extension Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga that the decision to go to court is the right thing. NASA has said times without number that they have a mountain of evidence. And I look forward to the day when that mountain of evidence will be presented before men and women who are schooled in the law for purposes of scrutiny to determine whether we are dealing with rumors, conjecture, or the truth. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying, this is a revelation, and the counsel that prevailed and ensured that NASA took this decision is something that must be praised.
Komodo, I must ask you this. When James Orengo first said they weren't going to court, it looked like a major defiance. And then the about turn today, after the cancellation of the press conference yesterday, what could have happened between yesterday and today if they were going to court? I mean, going to court is going to court.
I suspect why some minds prevailed. I mean, the reality is that the refusal to go to court was a zero-sum game. It was going to be very difficult to continue, even as a coalition as NASA, if they were going to be defiant in that manner. Remember that unlike 2007, the public support for NASA had diminished, you know, for several reasons. One is that whether one contests the ultimate result, the reality is that a lot of Kenyans had faith in the technical component of the election because we watched it happen. And even if you recognize that there were challenges here and there, most people recognize that the technical aspects of the elections were right. Number two is that the presidential result very much reflected the national political boundaries, so that the Jubilee win was reflected not just in the presidency but even in the other races. So in a sense, the country was sort of coming to terms with the reality that maybe Jubilee did win, and those who had a problem with the technical components of the election, the only way to resolve that is through a technical process. The only way to do that is to resolve that through the court. So I think wiser minds prevailed and said, I think, one, for closure, and secondly, because we need to affirm our young institutions. We are still a very young democracy. It's important that we continue to grow the Supreme Court and other institutions. If we delegitimize them at this point, then where do we ask the country to go? So it's a good thing that wiser minds prevailed.
Yeah. Grant Muller, you were there in 2013, Supreme Court. You were there. You might be called the next couple of days to be in part of this. And the question I'm asking is, isn't this deja vu all over again?
No, but I think, I mean, you have to understand or ask the question, what other options were left for Raila and his team? They had nowhere else to go. The international community, you know, literally give them a red card. Kenyans are not for, you know, demonstrating daily on the streets. The narrative they are telling people that, you know, either computer problem or their votes were stolen. I mean, you can't tell the same narrative over and over again. So what option is left? The only option that's left for them is to come to the Supreme Court. And as my good friend PLO rightly said, the Supreme Court is not a place where you tell stories or where you peddle rumors. The Supreme Court is a place where, for you to succeed, you have to bring, you know, a tight, waterproof case. And I think that's what they will face when they come to the Supreme Court. I don't know the evidence. I don't know what they will say. But I think, just like 2003, You know, it's not. You know, they will be surprised. They will be disappointed again if they expected the Supreme Court to give them what they wish or hope to be given. No, yeah. It's a trial by 7 of our best, you know, judges in this country. It's a trial that's shot for 14 days, and so they will face, you know, a very difficult case.
Let me pick up on that. PLO. It looked like NASA flag bearer Raila Odinga was addressing the Supreme Court directly, saying, "You have a chance to redeem yourself." What does that mean?
You know, Jeff, you remember we have sat here times without number, and I said at one time that when you go into an election, be Shakespearean, reason with the worst, expect defeat and celebrate victory when it comes. Once again, I think that what one does when one approaches a court of justice is to present the evidence that you have, use the best lawyers that you have, and let the court make a determination. To tell the court that we are giving you an opportunity to redeem yourself is not politic. And my own view is that one can understand where Honorable Raila is coming from, but I believe that he believes that this time round, if they have the evidence, then they will have their day in court. But the most important thing, and it must never be forgotten, a court of law is moved by the evidence that is availed to it, and not, as I've said, by conjecture, not by rumors. The last time I heard, and this was from my good friend G. Morengo, that we are not going to court, we are going to the court of public opinion. No. The court of law, as my good friend Ahmed Nasir has said, is a court that is composed of men and women who are schooled and learned in the law. And they are going to look at the factual position as tested against the law, and they are going to make their determination on that basis. But wisdom has always taught us, don't dare a court of law.
But I mean, as you rightly, I mean, it is a very patronizing statement, you know, made by Raila, that the court, for it to redeem itself, must rule in his favor. And courts normally don't do that. Courts, as everybody knows, rule according to the evidence. But that's the same philosophy, you know, that informed Raila's, you know, campaign or even his electioneering period. That, you know, if I lose, I have lost because it will be rigged. If I win, it's because it has not been rigged. And it's that same philosophy is bringing it to the court. And you see, these are positions he crafts unilaterally, wants the court or the electoral body to agree with, and that's not the way things are done.
Yeah, come on, though, real quick. The international observers, to a person, if you will, more than 400 of them, 9 international observer missions from the AU to the EU, the Carter Center, NDI, to a person, they said this was one of the freest and fairest elections they ever covered. Could there have been some pressure? Could NASA have been succumbing to some pressure?
I don't know, but remember that in the last 1 year, and it's good to give credit where it's due, courtesy of a lot of the push by NASA itself in the period leading up to the elections, there were very many places we tightened in our electoral system, including NASA pushing for an electronic system, the EVs, which, by the way, no one has complained about, and it was the most critical aspect of our election, the fact that you could no longer ballot staff. The fact that we now had a results transmission system, despite what has been said about them, the fact that we ended up even with a decision that said the elections, the presidential will be declared final at the constituency. A lot of those reforms actually came courtesy of NASA. Now, for the international community, it was very difficult then to challenge that election when you could see that most of the traditional loopholes in this part of the world had actually been blocked. And in a sense, the problem now even for NASA became, if you're going to challenge this election, you need to find the point at which you're going to say the result was compromised. People forget, Jeff, that if you take the presidential election, for example, because it's important for us to keep telling people what happened. You know, there are lots of experts, 34A, 34B, and it confuses people. This process was actually very simple. You go to your polling station, you vote. That, at the close of polling, people count votes there in the station. Those results are entered into a form called 34A. At the polling station, everybody's there. By that time, nobody knows who's winning. So actually, all agents sign that form. That form is then taken to the constituency. physically, together with the ballot boxes. Those forms are counted in the presence of everybody, because at that time you don't know what the aggregate numbers are. That is what becomes Form 34B. That 34B is then collected and taken to Nairobi. So the results are actually not announced through the result transmission system. The result transmission system was a process to give the issue legitimacy. It was not the legal result. The legal result is based on the forms that were signed in the 290 constituencies. So if you're going to challenge this election, you have to be able to go to Kasipul Kabondo and show that the result in Kasipul Kabondo did not reflect the 34 A's that came from the polling stations of that constituency. If you are not able to prove that, the questions of the results transmission system and hacking are interesting, they are good drama, but they don't go to the legality of the result. That is what the international observers saw. That is the quality of an election in any first world country. Now, does that mean that it didn't have challenges? We will never know. We'll wait for the Supreme Court decision. For all we know, maybe there was compromise in particular constituencies, but it is very difficult to attack that election because of the reforms that have happened in the last 1 year. That is why a lot of people who were objective were able to affirm the result. And the only way to resolve is to bring evidence to show that there was an impeachment of that process.
And Jeff, just what Waiganja said, NASA or CORD or ODM litigated these matters, 21 cases in total with other NGOs, and I think that was a very good thing. And the intention was to ensure that all loopholes are sealed. And I remember I participated in a case jointly with my good friend Ahmed Nasser on the Friday before the elections on Tuesday, where the issue was what is the mode of identification and the mode of transmission. So there is a sense in which when we demystify all these things, because it is very easy when you are speaking at a press conference to create an impression that there's something untoward. But when you begin to examine each one of these issues and credit to NASA, in the Maina Kiai case versus IEBC, the court ruled that the results will actually be declared at the polling station. And that is what reigned supreme. So that what you see happening at the Bomas of Kenya is a technical arithmetic exercise of tallying. And that is why, therefore, the international community, the observers, both European, American, and local, are saying that when we look at the entire exercise, this exercise looks good, and we have no reason to question that this particular exercise was conducted in a particular manner. And one wants to see, and I would myself be very interested to see how NASA and the lawyers are able to craft and to demonstrate on the basis of evidence, not rumors, not conjecture, not drama, not melodrama, dry as dust law, to demonstrate that there was something untoward, and whether they will move the court to determine that the impact of those mishaps was such as to indicate that the people, the will of the people of Kenya was not expressed, because that is the unanimous test. Did the will of the people of Kenya, as expressed in the vote, justify the declaration of the winner?
As dry as dust law.
Indeed.
No, as my learned friend has rightly said, there are two parties we should really credit for giving a lot of credibility to the elections we just had: NASA and the courts. They have done. NASA went to court so many times in order to ensure that the process is credible and certain doubtful procedures are clarified. And the courts, in almost 90% of the cases, agreed with NASA and set out a very clear and rigid procedure to be followed, so that everybody knows how various important aspects of the elections will be carried. And I think it's to the credit actually of both the court and NASA that all those issues were clarified before the elections. And when we went to the elections, all those issues were no longer in doubt, to the satisfaction of NASA, as they pleaded before the courts.
But did NASA spend too much time in the courts and forgot about campaigning?
No, I think they had enough personnel. Some of them were in the court, some of them were campaigning. So we can't say they spent a lot of time in court.
Okay.
There was enough division of labor.
Yeah, okay. Come on, though. If the court upholds the decision and says the president-elect and deputy they're in.
Then
what happens?
There will be a swearing in a short while, before the month of within the month of September, and then we'll proceed on. And I think for me, the danger about the statement that was made by the Prime Minister yesterday, today, I think one, let's affirm the Prime Minister's position, and I think this was Raila Odinga, the statesman, to recognize that this election is not just about him, it's not just about his team, it's also about the entire country. And I think saying we will go to court for whatever reason was a very pragmatic and wise thing. It was the statesmanly thing to do. I think the third thing is that when you then start to imply doubt on the court, it is not helpful to bring closure to that issue. Because what you're saying is as if you're waiting, you're saying we are reserving our decision on the credibility of this matter, depending on whether this court will agree with us. You see, if you don't agree on the credibility, if you don't think the court can deliver judgment for you, then do not submit yourself to the court. You do not have the luxury of saying we're going to go through a judicial process, but the only way this judicial process can be resolved is if it is resolved in my favor. What I am hoping the Prime Minister is meaning is that when the decision is finally issued, it will be so well crafted, it will have proper reasoning so that it is acceptable even to the losers. It cannot be allowed to mean that unless you issue the decision in our favor, then you have no credibility. It cannot be the same thing that was said about the elections, that the only way we can lose is if the election is rigged. That is not helpful for this discourse about our elections.
Okay, let's pick up on that, PLO. What if the Supreme Court overturns this decision? Then what?
Of course, if the Supreme Court takes the view that the elections were not properly conducted and nullifies the election, then we will go into a runoff, one may say, between the top two candidates, and in that event, of course, we will have 60 days within which to do that, and Kenyans will have the opportunity to vote, and of course, we'll have a president within 60 days who will be declared by the IEBC. If that were to happen, then that will be the process.
But I think for the benefit of our viewers,
yes,
I think we need to tell them how the Supreme Court decides cases like this.
Go on, walk us through
it's a very simple case. The Supreme Court, you know, like when we were before it last time, for the Supreme Court to have nullified the presidential election between Uhuru and Raila, had a simple task. There was a 7,000 votes difference that if deducted from Uhuru's numbers, we will have gone for a second round. So Raila was told by the Supreme Court to show and satisfy the Supreme Court that 7,000 votes were added to Uhuru. Show us how we should deduct that, and once you show us, we will order a rerun. And he couldn't show, he couldn't satisfy the court that Uhuru has 7,000 extra votes. So when this case is tried now, the Supreme Court will tell Raila a very simple issue. There's a difference of 1.4 million votes between you and Uhuru. Show us a formula, or show us that, for example, in Mandera, there is 200 votes that we should not have added. So it's a tedious exercise. He must satisfy the court that there is 1,400,000 votes that has been added to Uhuru's votes that should be deducted. It's that simple. It's that difficult.
Wow.
Yes.
And they have
and just to, I don't want to get into the merits of the case, but the truth is that I've looked at quite a number of cases, the Yoweri Museveni Kizza Besigye case, the Buhari case, and I've looked at the Omar Bongo, the Bongo case in Gabon. There is a sense in which there are certain things that the litmus test, which will be the basis of the determination, and that is why I'm looking forward to the Nazarites, as it were, coming forth and saying in very clear terms, this is what we want to be impugned, and to demonstrate by dint of evidence as tested against the law, and without getting into the merits of the case. One wants to see that day.
And unlike 2013, you see, 2013, court then came out with a complaint that they did not have sufficient time, that they expected the court to allow them certain space to file fresh affidavits. I think now everyone goes into this process knowing that the timelines are very strict. So what I am assuming is that by now NASA is ready with all its evidence, because I think the way the Supreme Court rules are is that you present your case with all the evidence that you're going to use in your case. So I'm hoping that by now all the evidence that is required has already been prepared. The law has also even made it easier, because the law now actually requires that IEBC must provide the parties that are going to be parties in the petition certain evidence within 48 hours of a dispute being declared. That makes it easier for the parties to come and make a case. I think what we must avoid is trying this as if we are trying a political matter and pushing arguments that are purely playing to the political base. We need to recognize that this is a legal process. The elections itself are a legal process. It's about compliance with the law. You need to be able to show that in the processes that IEBC carried out, there was a failure to comply. If you're not able to do that, or a lot of the issues that are raised, about hacking, unless you're able to show not only that it happened, but that it had a prejudicial impact on the election result, it really will not make a difference. So NASA has a responsibility, and they have said they have the evidence, and I don't doubt they have the evidence, to present evidence, not to make a case to the public, but to make a case to those judges, that those judges should, like senior counsel says, remove the 1 million votes so that we can now have a rerun. If you are not able to do that, all that will be politics.
So don't play to the gallery.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Because, and I saw this, and I've seen this. There is an attempt, particularly some bishop in one of the churches here, Bishop Oginde, gave a very good sermon, that in this country there is this thing that he called the dichotomy, the belief that there is black and white, and that in itself is misguided. What we are dealing with is that the Nazarites have their own truth, the Jubilees have their own truth, but the law has the law to deal with. And the judges will be moved not by the partisan positions, but by the law, as the evidence as tested against the law. And that is why I would tell both parties, lower your expectations. The courts will not be intimidated. The court will not be impressed by melodrama and razzmatazz. The court will be moved by the evidence. Present the evidence. Stop press conferences. Let your lawyers go to court and argue their case, and a determination will be made. And prepare. Both parties must prepare their constituencies. Shakespeare was right. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
William Shakespeare, oh my. Graham Muller, let me ask you this. As early as, I think it was day 1 or day 2, NASA flag bearer Raila Odinga came out and gave a press conference saying everyone who is won, from the MCA to the governors in NASA, should not accept the victories because it was rigged top down. They didn't do that. Is there a double standard here? Because no one has gone and surrendered their certificate.
No, but you see, I mean, when they made that first statement, it was a very simple statement that said that, whereas he did not dispute the voting phase of the election in terms of, the biometrics on the first day of the election, he just disputed the second phase, that's the transmission. In other words, according to Raila and NASA, the transmission of the results from, the constituencies and from the polling station was hacked, and there was something that was inserted according to them. And to the credit of IEBC and everybody else, it was decided that, okay, fair enough, you have said this system is hacked, let us keep it aside. A manual tallying was done, that took several times, I think 3 or 4 days, and that's a tiring manual exercise, going through the form 34A, 34B to make the 34C. And the final result, as far as the public know, was that the result that was announced was as a result of the manual tally. Yes, that's what we were told as the public. If that was done and there was no major difference between the two, I think, as Kamodo rightly said, now the task for them when they come to the court is to show that even the manual tallying, probably someone hacked it.
And that's
manual. That's for them to tell us.
Anybody who has participated in the elections, and I think part of the problem is many of us actually don't go and vote or stay on until this process stops. What will surprise you is that by about 2 a.m., the results in all polling stations have been counted. So actually by 2 a.m., the principal data, the raw data of the elections is already available and has been signed for. So by the time it comes in the morning to the constituencies, all we're doing is actually just completing, we're doing simple additions, you know. So that is why I'm saying that the burden on the party that says that this election is impeachable is a very high burden, because you will have to show, you see, previously, and that is some of the problems of success. Previously, when the National Tally Center is where the results were finally declared, there was a space in between the constituencies and the national where you could impeach the credibility of the process. But because the process now starts at the devolved system, because now the constituency is the election devolved government, because the elections are declared there, the raw data is very easily verifiable. Once you confirm that that data reflects what was the result in the polling center, it is very, very difficult to then show that the result between the constituency and the National Tally Center was, because that's what you'd have to show, or that the additions were wrong. Right. So I'm just saying that the burden, because we crafted a good law, because the courts affirmed a good process, it has the responsibility on a petitioner is very, very high. Even if you take something, and that's what I said, even if you take something like the results transmission system, even if you are to show that there was a problem in that transmission system, I've had allegations about an algorithm. That is a problem for those of us from where I emanate from. But even if you are to show that there was a problem there, you can actually set it aside and say, that's all right, we don't have to consider that. Let us look at the manual process and then produce the result. I think the danger, let me tell you, Jeff, the danger of this conversation about rigging is that if you convince yourself as an electorate that the election is rigged all the time, then what you do is sometimes you don't have the time for self-reflection to say, where did we go wrong? What could we have managed differently? So that the next time you run the election differently so that you whatever victory. If you convince yourself that it is because, then your concern is how to stop rigging, as opposed to how to ensure that you are expanding your political base. That is part of the problem of this conversation. It is useful in the beginning, I think it is healthy, and especially if there is actual rigging. But if there isn't, or it is not verifiable, it cannot be proven, it is not helpful politically also.
PLO, real quick before we go to break, it seemed in the press conference that a lot of air was let out of a balloon. In fact, you could see the body language of people in Kisumu. They were expecting something different. But it seemed like, you know, in the end, we're just going back to court.
You know, there is a sense in which, remember that the press conference was to be yesterday. And there was a sense in which the constituency, that is NASA's, expected that there was going to be something monumental. And remember, the expectation was well informed. NASA had announced times without number, and at their rally both in Kibera and Mathare, they had said, we are not going to court. That is a slaughterhouse. And if you listen to Honorable Raila Odinga's statement in its early stages, it was defiant. But then wisdom, in its characteristic way, it intervened. And Honorable Raila did the honorable thing to recognize that in civilized democracy, for which he was one of the major participants, when you have a dispute, you go to court. So the constituency, as we have seen in some of the footage, is very disappointed. They expected something dramatic, something that is out of this world. I do not know what it is. It was anticlimactic, as you used the right English word.
Thank you.
But yet there is a sense in which I must praise Raila Amolo Odinga. He has served this country well. He has made the right decision. That is the decision that is expected of a honorable and a respectable individual. And despite what anybody else within his ranks may want to say, what he has done is right and proper. And when history is written, it will be said of him that at the critical moment, he made the right decision.
Gentlemen, that's a good point to take a break on, because I want to come back and talk about the others in that press conference. What happens to Kalonzo? Has he lost the foothold of Ukambani? What happens to Mudavadi? What happens next? Let's walk around the nation. Sonko in Nairobi. Let's talk about Kirinyaga, Kwale, Kisii. Jubilee performed incredibly. a lot to talk about. You know, we need to walk across the country. Let's do that after the break. Jeff Koinange, where are we looking, Monica? Thank you. Okay, thanks. This is really fascinating information here, and we're breaking it down. What happens next in the history of this nation? We do know it's the Supreme Court. That's going to decide in 2 weeks. After that, well, we don't know. Stay tuned. We're going to walk around across the country, the other winners and losers, right here on Jeff Koinange Live. Stay tuned. Keep tweeting at Koinange Jeff, at Kamadawai Ganjo, at Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi, hashtag JK Live. And JK Live takes a break. We'll be back in a moment.